We should probably like tell people.
Oh, yeah. Very important. So we're going to be recording a little bit today, but we're not going to record anybody's personal constellation unless, unless you're up for that. But I don't, right now we don't plan to do that.
And if we have
So-
personal check-ins, we'll turn it off.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just,
Pause.
it's for our, for our needs.
So, yeah, and so I think just to say a little bit before we start getting going, this will probably be kind of a hill mountain shaped process. So people will start to trickle in a little bit slowly today. Today's not as key for people that already know what they want to do with the program. Then tomorrow it'll get busier, and then Sunday it'll be a smaller group again, because then we'll go into just working with people that are learning about, the intro to facilitation. That should be kind of the feel of the weekend.
That's what I did to say.
Yeah, we're in that day.
It does, yeah. Something unusual is kind of like. Oh, Karen, who does the interviews? Yeah.
I know. Dates. Yes.
There's something there for you actually, Jen, because I went into
Oh.
this. Yes, you see what it is.
And
Yeah. I went, but you left the bag, which is good.
Yes.
But I was shopping for stuff here, and I was in one of the halal shops that I go to get dates and tea and all those things. And they have a lot of like Eastern European products. And I actually heard people speaking Russian in the shop. Yeah. And there were people speaking Russian in the shop, and I saw a bag that had Cyrillic letters on it. So I got it. So just some kind of cookies. You'll see.
Yeah. They look yummy, but not,
Yeah, you're welcome. But
they look yummy, but not.
they do. But they're definitely not gluten or sugar or anything. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
That's right.
Take them next Easter Sunday. Yes.
Shall we not wait?
Yeah, I don't think we should wait for the others, but I'll close the door. All right. Yeah, so why don't we, before we do the exercise, do a check-in? And
We'll pause it. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, if we can turn off cell phones on too, that would be good.
If you miss it.
So I just wanted to do one last check-in before we start. I think I know, but who has not done a constellation?
Observed one, but not.
You haven't really participated. Anybody else? Okay. All right. So we are going to go over some things that are kind of basics a little bit, if that's okay for everybody. And this is, as you guys know, this is moving into a couple of different themes. So tonight we're getting people ready to think about whether they want to participate Sunday. But also we have the theme of heartbreak, which is tomorrow's theme. So it's all kind of braided in. And so what I would like to do is just to do two things. One is a visualization and one is an exercise, just to get everybody kind of tapped into working in the knowing field and give people who are new a chance to experience it for the first time in a very easy to absorb way before we go into the full group experience. So what we'll do is, to start, I'll just ask you to take a minute to do a little bit of body awareness. And this is your main vehicle for constellation. So we really want to be tuned into it. And I encourage you to keep your eyes open as you do your body awareness, because closing your eyes takes you into the imagination. So to just feel a little bit, start with your right foot. And make yourself aware, and you can move a little bit if you need to do that to be embodied, all the way up to your right butt cheek. Just feel that whole right leg, slowly bring your awareness to it. It's going to move you in the constellations. And then bring your consciousness into a kind of a U shape so that you go up your bottom and then to the right, to the left side, and down to your left foot. Feel all of that. And feel it as like sort of one intertwined organism that keeps you supported, moving, going in the world. It's going to be a lot, like I said, of what moves you when you constellate. And just notice if it's tight or tense or holding old memories. Let's start doing the same thing with your right hand. Similar U shape, make a connection with your right hand, again, keeping your eyes open, all the way up your arm to your shoulder. Up to your head. Down your torso to your waist. Touch with your gut sensations. Whatever's held in your heart and in your shoulders and in your neck and in your head. Just remind your body that it's serving the knowing field today. And from the left shoulder, feel all the way down to your left hand. Then notice your whole upper body as one organism, one interconnected organism. And then finally bring your awareness all the way from head to toe. Notice it is all one interconnected organism and remind your body that it's going to be serving the knowing field. All right. Now you can drop into your imagination. Go ahead and close your eyes. And I'll ask you to introduce into your imagination your mother at a distance of about 4 or 5 feet in front of you. And just take a moment, regardless of what kind of history you have with your mother, beautiful, difficult, something in between, just to take a moment just to recognize her. And if you don't know who your biological mother is, just place someone there as her. And then do the same, turn in your mind to your father. Notice him, acknowledge him, whatever the history, wherever it is on the scale of easy or hard, the relationship. Just take a minute to acknowledge that he's how you came into the world, even if you don't know him or never met him. That he played this part, this role. And then just take a minute to notice that your parents also have parents, which they have whatever sort of relationship they have, and see your grandparents behind them. in whatever form you're able to see them. And from there, just gently, without trying to concentrate too hard, just add in rows of ancestors, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents, and let the field of all of these beings whose destiny it was to give you life populate your imagination until they go off all the way. They become like a group of people, almost a town or a city of people. And allow all of the furthest back ancestors to just sort of fade out into the natural environment. The water, the air, the earth, fire. Just be there for a minute. And then your mother's going to step forward and she's going to hand you something that symbolizes your life itself that she passed on to you with her body. Just take that and receive that as best you can. Look at it and hold it. Ready. Turn around, leaving that great tribe of people behind you, and look forward at your life. If you have children, you can see your children in front of you. If you have a project that you've given birth to, you can see that in front of you. But standing with the life you've been given held close, look at where you're going. As you look there, I'm just going to read something to you about the gift of coming into incarnation. When the soul comes into the physical world, it receives an offering from the whole universe. And that offering is the body in which to function. It is not offered to the soul only by the parents, but by the ancestors, by the nation, and the race into which the soul is born, and by the whole human race. The body is not only an offering of the human race, but it is an outcome of something that the world has produced for ages. A clay that has been kneaded 1,000 times over. A clay that has been prepared so that in its very development, it has become more intelligent, more radiant, and more living. Clay that appeared first in the mineral kingdom, that developed in the vegetable kingdom, that then appeared as the animal, and that was finished in the making of that body that is offered to the new coming human soul. Daily meditation, Hazrat Inayat Khan. If you feel like you've taken that in, you can open your eyes and join the room. So welcome to being alive and having a body and being in the Constellation workshop. Yeah, how is everybody? Right? Good. So I have an exercise I'd like for us to do, but I don't know if you want to
No,
do or say something.
no, I love this. Great.
So some of you have done this before, but this is just practice for being present and comfortable in the field. Now that you're in your body, and we're gonna kind of go back and forth, from the future, the present, the past, over the weekend, you're gonna get a little bit of all of that. What I'd like to ask you to do, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 14. You've got exactly the right number to break up into twos. I'm gonna ask you to stand up and make a group of 2 with the person next to you. Yeah, go free to greet the person. Or you- Okay, so what you're gonna do is you're going to do a representation for each other. You're gonna take turns. This is a really simple one. I'm gonna give you 2 options. This is gonna sound a little funny, but either you ask the other person to represent someone who you like, who you get along with well, shouldn't be somebody you have any problems with, or one of your grandparents that you have good feelings for. So choose one of those 2. So either like a grandmother who was very sweet and you got along with well, hopefully we all had at least one of those. Or some people didn't, or just one person who's like neutral to positive in your life. And you don't have to tell the person who it is. In fact, it's kind of more interesting not to, so they don't really have any reference point. But you just pick who's gonna go first. And so if I was gonna go first, I would say, Charey, would you represent for me?
Yes.
Okay. And then what she's gonna do is she's just gonna, we're not gonna speak, we're just gonna somatically feel what happens once we say yes to representing whoever the person has in mind. It's good also to kind of touch the person like on the shoulder. Would you represent for me? Make a little contact.
As long as you have an agreement, that's okay.
If that's okay. Yeah.
Or not.
Yes.
Yes, you just want to get the consent.
Yeah, all things.
Makes
Verbal, eyes, looking into each other's eyes, whatever. Trans.
So you decide who wants to, that's right. So that the person feels who you're asking them to represent. Okay, so just decide who goes first. You just asked if you.
I went to her. Yeah, that's pretty. Thank you, and then.
You know who it is? Oh, so. Go ahead and.
So are they welcome to speak again?
Yeah.
Go ahead and begin. We'll call it.
And we.
We're not gonna talk. Once you're clear and you've gotten your roles, don't speak, okay? Yeah, don't say how you're feeling. Don't say anything. And if you need to make a movement with the body to show something, you can do that. Feel free to. So slowly start to come out of that representation. And the one who requested it, you can just say thank you. And you can go back to being and then say the person's name. You're releasing the person who represented for you. Thank you, and say their name. Yeah. Okay, yes. So go ahead and exchange about what happened, and then we're gonna switch. And you're gonna switch roles. Okay? Yes, you can talk now. Yes. Talk about whatever you want. Cheers. It's like. It is. There's a lot of history around here, like interesting. It's an M1. Yeah. Sleep with. Okay, everybody, so start wrapping up your narrative. Okay, we can talk more later, everybody. We can talk more later. Just a general check-in. Oh, good. Good work. Good work. Okay, all right, good. So you can do more unpacking during the break if you want. Go ahead and switch roles. So the person who represented will now request the other person to represent, and just hold in mind who it is you want them to represent. A little tap and request their consent.
Yeah.
Notice if you feel a draw or repulsion, you want to go closer, step further away, make a movement, let your body do anything it needs to. Just slowly, little by little, start to release the other person as you're ready.
Thank them.
Remind them of their name. Okay, so when you're ready, we're gonna all share together. Thank you. Let's rejoin. Oh, wow, you guys just decided to dive all the way in. Great.
That's what
I'll be the next program.
that is
Okay.
that's
That's this.
this is a taste.
Yeah. So now that we're, just to turn our attention to everybody, does anybody want to share anything in particular? It's going. Yeah, let's pause. All right, everybody, we're gonna start coming back together. Ding, 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 ding. We're getting back together, guys. You can bring food in here if you need to.
Please,
Okay,
eat.
yeah.
You can do this thing if you want. I don't need to do it by- Yeah, it's-
Okay. It looks more lit up to me, but.
All right. Okay, so for this portion of the show, we're going to talk a little bit of the principles and background to what we do, and kind of start moving towards also. It's already. Thank you. Yeah, I just was not really.
Sure.
So yeah, we're gonna go over a little bit of the principles, the perspective. Some of you know some of this. It's also good to review from a different angle. And then kind of how it rolls into what these principles are important for people that think that they might want to go into learning about facilitation. So so one of the main things, the main like pithy kind of essential differences with this type of work from other modalities is that we work really hard to keep a wider perspective than just the individual person. Okay, so this is what it's kind of what it's all about, actually. So like Hallinger will say, like, you know, when I look at you, I see your mother, or when I look at you, I see several generations, or like almost like tweaking, like I don't know, almost like we have a musician here, like moving the board that you use when somebody's DJing, whatever you call it. Yeah, it's almost like you're kind of noticing the pitches and the, you know what I mean, amongst the different members of the family.
Crossfader.
Like different sounds and volumes of the different people around the person. How do they need to be adjusted? What direction could they go? That's one. And so he talks about, like, he never just sees one person in front of him. Okay. And so that's what Charey and I endeavor to do. If this is the kind of thing that you want to do, it's a very important, essential perspective. So and also just to think of it like as one individual, you're like one piece of a puzzle, or you're one part of a vast river of thousands of years of like history and evolution and humanity. You're taking like one piece of it for whatever mysterious reason. And so when we work with you and then you start to see these layers around you during the constellation, it's really with the awareness that that makes the process in a way easier than if you're in this tight sort of egoic experience of your own suffering. You know, like it's just me, you know? And that's all I can work with, and that can be very discouraging, but when we expand it, there's a lot of possibility there. So essentially, yeah, this is what the facilitator does. She or he is looking at you and working with you from that zoomed out perspective, and using a lot of what we would call phenomenology, which is just a kind of academic term for meeting things exactly as they are, with a minimum of like commentary, interpretation. There's some of that, but most of the time it's just a direct meeting with what's in front of you. And yeah, so free of as much interpretation as possible, free of as much like commentary, we're just feeling, what's it like to see you standing next to your mother, where you're standing a little far away and you're turning your back on her, right? At some point, there might be some story that we go into a little bit if it's necessary and it really helps. But phenomenology is just to expose yourself, just to be present with it. And that's it. It's a very kind of Zen way of doing things. So that's why you see when constellations are going on, there'll be these long periods of people just like moving and looking at each other.
And we're just letting looking.
And we're just staring, right? And you have the feeling they should be saying and doing something, and it doesn't happen like that.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I was mentioning to Logan, wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't have time at all? Because
Right.
I would love to just actually spend all this time observing a constellation, and then the next one, and let it take as long as it needed to do to unfold.
Like on the beach.
Yeah. And it was probably.
Right. So yeah, so those are important perspectives to have in mind. Treat it almost as if you're going through a meditation, whether you're having the constellation for yourself, whether you're in it, whether you're observing it. And if you come on Sunday, tomorrow I won't be asking, Charey won't be asking for lots of feedback from the group. You'll just be present. But if you are interested in facilitating, then there'll be more. We'll come a little out of the phenomenological stance a little bit and kind of more start chatting. What do you think about that? Because that's how you're educated. No, on Sunday. Did I say tomorrow? Sunday. Sunday, for the people that are interested in facilitation, that's when you'll go into more discussion. When it's the core essential like therapeutic experience, there's much less. But there's more looking at it to learn the process.
Logan, I think one thing that I read that you sent out was tomorrow, those of us who are interested in the facilitation learning, that we could like sort of be taking notes either mentally or.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we could bring
Yeah.
questions and information on.
Yeah, we
That's
definitely want you to have more than one hat.
Yes.
Obviously, if it's your constellation, you can let go
into
of
the
that.
field. Yeah.
But when you're observing other people's constellations, you might be representing or whatever, but you're taking it in as if you were a facilitator. And why is that? Why is that movement happening that way?
And then we'll do other little movements on Sunday, which might continue some of what you're curious about, or we'll pick up some slack on one of those topics, whatever came up for you on Saturday.
There's something about, I just want to
Please.
just expound on what you were saying, whether it's in the room or one-on-one, somebody is starting to have an experience, mother, father, their issue, whatever it is. And I believe that we tend to, I'll say, I start to feel something bodily. And I'm just contacting the body experience. You said that, but I'm just saying it again to reiterate. My job in that moment is to not evaluate it, like you already said, but it's just really being with the tension and the feelings and being in my body, witnessing that and feeling it. And so the other person may not even notice it yet, but I believe as a facilitator,
You're being in the role of facilitator, you're doing that.
Yeah, our witnessing starts to lend, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Lend that person the opportunity and the room to feel something that they couldn't feel.
Yeah, it's very different. And those of you who know, like doing a certain amount of work on yourself and then having a facilitator watch you go through a process, that witnessing, that really strong holding without commentary, it does add something else, you know, and that's why people show up to do this, for that kind of witnessing. So yeah, so then, okay, so to take it to then another level, so then how does the facilitator, what are they coming to the process with? Like, is this just this Zen experience of people just sort of interpretive dancing with each other? And, you know, because it can kind of look like that. And like I said, there's a lot of silence and a lot of holding space, but there is a lot in the background. There's a lot that as a facilitator, you're trained to look for. Some of it is just intuitive training. It's not training that's cognitive. And it's just practicing over and over being in the field until you get to where it's like, as soon as somebody walks in and they're sort of doing this, and you can't see much happening, but as a facilitator, like your own throat will start to like close up a little bit, and you'll be like noticing that they're looking down at the ground, which usually has to do with the connection to someone who died, that's unresolved. And you just sort of know that that person's very sad. So there's that intuitive work that you just develop over time, and you have to add that as the facilitator. And then there is the actual cognitive part where you do learn certain patterns that are very common in family systems. And we'll go into some of that Sunday, but that's called the orders of love. Something called the orders of love. And when you learn the orders of love, what happens is that as you watch the behavior of the representatives, you pretty quickly catch what is in or out of order. And what's out of order will tend to lead to suffering. And what's in order will tend to lead to more calm, or wellness. And so then on top of that, so that's a whole world of its own. And there's three main orders of love we'll go into. There are some others that have been proposed, there are different lists of them, but we'll talk about them in more detail Sunday. They are like they're a sort of a guide. And then there's really all the other stuff that comes out of the field. There are the things that have not really been formally written down, but you'll find them in other people's constellations, you'll find them in Bert Hellinger's constellations, figure them out through your own process, you know, individually, certain patterns and things that you will become second hand. And then the last thing I'd say on that is then there is the getting it all the way down to the most grounded level. Then there are the actual protocols, which, you know, there's some variation in them, but you need to learn some protocols, what you do and don't do, what you do in what order. You know, how do you take somebody into the field who's never done anything like this, who's emotionally charged? First of all, they need to be calm enough to be able to do it. Certain things, like generally you don't take people into the field to work on things with a relative who's just died. I mean, there are exceptions. Sometimes
Somebody
do it if it really.
Somebody has a certain way of holding themselves already.
Yeah.
But very often there's some patterns that are suggested. Yeah,
Suggestions, general guidelines. How do you take someone and show them how to choose people to represent for them? How do you talk to the person? Where do you put your attention in the group with the person on yourself? Because it sort of cool shots around while you're working. So the grounded kind of protocols of how to actually do it, the suggested ways, like, you know, like the fact that I asked you all, just if you don't have to, but it kind of helps to sort of gently touch the person that you're asking to represent.
And I just want to say that when facilitators, you know, they get into a pattern, then the people that have been learning from them do that same pattern, almost like like a law, and it's not.
Right.
You know, you have to turn around 3 times and shake it out when
Which is a great thing to do if you want.
when you let go of the representation. You need to always have the person represented in the constellation, not themselves. Or, you know, these are different things that get into patterns. They are not, we might have those that we have just found our way with, but you don't have to feel obligated, like, this isn't a good constellation if you haven't shaken your body or said your name again and again. And even we do a warm up where you test. Sometimes you don't need any of that. I've seen a variety, like you had a variety of different people lead constellation, and it looks completely different. I mean, except that there is this phenomenon, and then the knowing field, and there's this. So the little idiosyncrasies are what you're going to discover for you that is valuable for your work. But if we're handing you an idiosyncrasy, you don't have to
stress
take
about
it. Yeah. And you had mentioned, what was your question? It went away.
I was just asking if most constellations are nonverbal.
That's a good, see, that's another one of these.
So,
Go ahead.
well, so Bert Hellinger didn't have people speak to each other. And then over time, people have gotten a little more wordy in constellation work, especially in the United States, especially in English-speaking countries. When I'm in Latin America training, it never even comes up as an issue. Everybody just moves, they wait until somebody asks them. My style is what I learned in Latin America than what I've seen in the US. So that's what I've seen. The only thing I would say is that to different degrees, different people process through language. So the core of the constellation process is not language based, but different people are verbal in the way that they process things to different degrees. So for example, one area where you need rules, but you need to hold them lightly. So it's like a balance, right? You need the guidelines, but you don't need to be dogmatic. Either direction is not helpful. But like one thing that we often do is we ask people not to start unpacking the constellation verbally afterwards. And again, that's an area where that's left completely up to you. So if you decide that you feel like you really need to verbalize to process it, then obviously, you know. But for a lot of constellation work is holding like the core of the essence of what the group needs. And then individually you can kind of unpack and work with it.
Can you go into a little bit more on like the language? Why do you think it is that like the Latin American countries, they don't use verbal versus like America? Is it something intellectually that we're not getting, or is it something like spiritual? Like how does it affect? Should we be focusing more on not speaking?
It has to do with the way that English speaking people are taught that the center of their being is in their intellect. The intellect is and language are very close, right? They're both kind of like when you go from the intellect out into duality, you start to speak usually. And when you're very close to the self, there's something that's like pre-verbal. So that's not to say there's anything bad about verbalizing things and all that, but it's like in this line of working, you get the most out of it by going as deep as possible before you talk. And if a facilitator asks you in the field a question, it's better to be pretty simple in your, I feel sad, I feel not good, I like this person, I don't like that person. So the sharing. We do have to do what people get.
Yeah, it's learning, like we both watched, you know, Bert Hellinger on video and all that stuff. And we've also seen our own constellation facilitators kind of seem rude at points. And I remember talking to you earlier, you're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be rude to people. But, and then I'm like, yeah, we need to be rude to people. Like there's a feeling of like, yeah, we have to, in order to preserve the container, sometimes you have like,
it's all, it's with love. It's with love. Yeah.
Cultural thing where like we're conditioned to think of boundary as group.
Right.
Right. Right.
And it's totally with love, and it's usually for the benefit of the client. That's the key. The client. Like if there's a boundary in the constellation process, it's because what often gets forgotten is that this is a very cultural thing too. Like Americans were kind of Hollywood. So we like we start, it's representing I have a lot to say about this role. And it kind of becomes, and sometimes there's a lot of information in the field. And there's a lot you could act out. We could go all day. But what Charey and I are doing is we're keeping a check that what's the client need,
Yes.
right? And so if a lot of words or a lot of something, and then we're just always trying to, so sometimes that's why there needs to be, care. Also, this is not to be sort of paranoid about it, but there are directions that a constellation can go in that can be unhelpful.
Yeah.
And so if somebody starts to act that out, it's a beautiful service and we're very appreciative that they showed it. And sometimes it needs to be turned in.
There's so much about this that we could go into.
Right.
One of the things is an interview. Did you,
Right.
is that a different point?
No, I've pretty much got the overview. Just one other thing, but
Go ahead.
please.
Okay,
No,
so
no,
the
no, no.
interview is that when we, I always thought it was weird when I went to my original Constellation facilitators and they would go, or they'd be like,
Yeah.
let me just take this in.
Right.
And they, and I, I didn't know how to even start. Well, I have issues with my mother and blah, 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 blah. Like, and they want to know something else. And then they'd ask weird questions like,
Right.
how many siblings did your mother have? And how
When
many
you were
siblings-
talking about how she beat you,
how many
and
siblings you have? And were there any deaths? And did anyone, and was anyone in war? And did anyone immigrate? So
right.
they might ask these weird questions and I'm like, no, you're not listening. I have an issue with my mother.
That this person has told everybody many, many times and has not resolved it. And doesn't even, like, yes. So what I just say what the facilitator is doing is using those words of love. They're listening and they're like, oh, but you're saying like, my mother was an alcoholic and she hit me and she did this and the other, and you're like, was your mother born here? Your grandmother born here or in Poland? And it sounds really strange to the client because they're used to the usual psychotherapy. So
Yeah. And you start feeling like they've got a fixation about their mother and you start feel. I do. As a facilitator, I start to embody and listen with the body at mom. And sometimes they're talking about mom and I don't feel anything. And so I go, where's your dad? And that's when I go like, oh.
right. And when
So-
sharing,
So sometimes, I mean, in our, maybe, I don't know, maybe you remember that Harold was like, often it's not the person you think it is mentally. We're blaming mom or we're blaming dad. And then the one that we're entangled with, which is different than blame or they damaged us. Entanglement is not that they hurt us, it's that we caught the wave of some suffering. It's a different orientation. So that's, yeah.
So so there are some bullet points where you're talking about like the orders of love and things to be mindful of, but a lot of you are using intuitive, like, I see what you're saying, it's like word of knowledge type stuff. Okay, so it's also some of that individually, we're just gonna have to sort through that and see what it is. And there's not really a right or wrong, we're gonna have to be the moment.
there's not a guideline for everything.
If I notice, I know from experience and from some knowledge, for instance, that if somebody has a really hard time with relationships, they may have a break with mother. Or they might have a break with the same gender parent. And then we can look at that but I just test it out. As a facilitator, I check it out. I've got the issue in there or the relationship conflict. I got mother in, I got father in, and then I start to discover, I might, the history of experience might not be, it might not be exactly what this person has. So I test it out. I'm testing things and there could be like, oh, there's nothing here. Okay, you can sit down. Thank you.
Then you can see if your intuition was right or not by testing it out in the field.
Heard you guys say a lot, like, just let the stories kind of drop away. And that's kind of what I hear you saying with like, when someone's cut this story, we often have these stories about, even as we think about our own ancestry, and it's like, just be open to seeing what's there. Maybe the story, like you're seeing some part of it. It's almost like you're saying with the DJ, it's like you have this one channel turned up,
Right.
but there's all this other stuff that's kind of like in the mix, right?
Something that's been turned down. Something that's been turned down that might need to be turned up and looked at.
So get
That the person wouldn't think of, because they're so in that story, that repetition of suffering, they don't realize it's their grandfather. That's part of why they're suffering, because it's in the unconscious. So you have the benefit of the facilitator to say, and the nice thing about Charey and I working together, which like I was saying is very unusual in a lot of contexts, is that we'll often have the same intuition at the same time, and that's a way of testing it.
You're like jumping up at the
Right. Or like,
but he might do it differently. And I was, but it's amazing how it also worked.
right. And like, I remember the very first time I was working with Charey, and she said, just come back with me, and like, if you're a facilitator, let's just chat during the break. Or we no, you actually said to me, just come and work with this client with me. You asked if it was okay with that. And we went in the back and we both sat there and we both said, this is your dad. And then that was it. We've been right. And she said, yeah, it's the dad. So there are different ways of, it's almost kind of, yeah, you can sort of, let's say it's something between an art and a science. In the sense that there are ways to test things out and find out.
It is art and science. I mean, and okay, so when we're talking about this, I'm becoming aware that it is very easy in the common practice to think blame and shame. Somebody did you wrong. We're supposed to divorce ourselves from anybody who did us wrong. We're supposed to ostracize, blah, blah, blah. You need to get away from them. And those are good actions when there is some toxic circumstance, of course. But that divorcing and separating out is like cutting off parts of your body, because essentially your ancestors are in your cell. And for you to, yes, if there's a terrible pattern, of course, to, find another way of relating. Or never talk, but but relate differently, but still relate. So the whole blame and thing, when we talk about like it's dad, it's not as it's dad's fault. It's like, this is a whole topic where there is no fault. It's patterns that keep repeating through generations. Not exactly every sibling, for instance. Mother,
right.
There's 5 siblings, 2 or 3 are taking on father's stuff, and 2 or 3 are taking on mother's stuff. Sometimes they're taking a little bit of both. Some of them are experiencing being in the middle between parents. Like they're kind of caught in a web between them. So there are all sorts of dynamics. So it's, and we want to blame because because that's what we're taught. Instead of like, we open-heartedly we were born into this family. There's generations of patterns and they have a lot of power. Until we observe them differently, see them as patterns, see them as stories, and we can go, oh, and something can shift over here. So that's That's a piece. I just wanted to say that as we're talking about, it's mom, it's dad, no blame. It's like it's a whole other way of looking, open-hearted field.
So would you say that, I'm sorry.
Nope.
Would you say that, well, the way I'm hearing that is we're observing, recognizing, and not judging? Does that sound?
Because
Right.
that's the way to get the most knowledge in the situation.
I agree.
Right, so as soon as you, like, I mean, I might jokingly say, because we're all having an intense day while we're like doing 5 constellations in a few hours, you know, I might be like, yes, literally. I might make a joke about whoever.
You're like, look at the density in here.
Like, we're like, you know, whatever. make fun of the
Everybody's
person.
dead.
We all need. Right, exactly. Like, this is a horror film, not a constellation. You know, like this is, we all have to let off steam like that, but that's not the essential. The essential attitude is like, the more that you expose yourself without judgment, the more you take in.
Yeah.
And some people, I will say this to flag this up, because it's a bit controversial, people touchy about this. Sometimes when you look at Bert Hellinger's work, like, he doesn't really make any judgment about things that are quite serious. And it's not because he thinks that a genocidal whatever is not a big deal, but he obviously, he works in a way that it's like he might say to someone, yes, I understand that everybody on your parents' side, your father's side, died in this war. And I understand that this other country, they committed this crime. But look at this the genocidal rage that you've taken on in response and what it's doing to your kids. Like, look at the dynamic. It in no way, you know, minimizes the fact that, you know, the people in this region killed the other side, but there's a way that when you zoom out, you see more if you don't jump to a
Right.
It's for the context of the constellation. That's also important to say. It's not a social agenda. It's for the context of the constellation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's intense.
Let me go into these readers and I guess I know, Charey, sometimes when you do them, you'd like to wrap it up with it, and you'll start talking to the actors. There's a sense that you're wrapping up for the client. What does that do? Or what is it? What would happen?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Well, there are some constellations that you can place in certain things and the whole constellation does it itself. Thank you. And it like everything seems to just get resolved. And that's occasional, where I'm like, I didn't have to do anything. I just watched it. We helped to set it up. There was a way it was listened to. There was enough resources in the field. And whatever that means, we can explain,
Right.
But it basically just resolved. But a lot of the times, we start a pattern, we start looking at something, and there's kind of a stuckness that we're starting to observe. And so there's elements that we can bring in, or there's an opportunity to just get clear about what's operating. And sometimes people do need to cognitively bring it in a little bit more. And so we just get enough data so that we can see if it starts to flow differently.
Right.
And like there's
You kind of stir it up.
I'm stirring it up, and I'm also seeing if we can find some truths. And as soon as a truth is spoken, the whole field relaxes.
Truth being something that the client didn't know. So
It until the constellation happens.
And it's just like most obvious stuff. And part of it is we're here witnessing things that people don't usually witness, even in themselves. And we're witnessing with and for them, and often with a group of people who are witnessing. And it's like, Well, I just recently said, it was courageous for you to be born. That was the phrase I heard. It took courage to be born in this family as who you were. You know, it was like something just all of a sudden bubbled up and a person is able to see something. Oh, it gave perspective. You know, that's not blame or shame. I'm not right. I'm not wrong. This is wrong. I'm, you know, it's just, it's like, suddenly it was like, there's an opening. So sometimes when we use words like that, and a lot of them, you know, there's some really basic ones that just help you to disentangle. You know, I took this on, you know, out of love. Those are often, you'll hear me say those things and you'll hear us say those things, but sometimes it's just a phrase that just, you get them to repeat it. And then, or something, no, it's not quite that, what is it? You listen to it a little bit from them. And, okay, say it just like this. And sometimes someone's just rattling stuff off. And I'm like, wait, just say this one phrase, and that has potency, and everything is now shifted. A new understanding is starting to emerge. But in the rattling, they weren't going to get it. So that's why you're right. Like I bring in some of my influence, and I might be wrong, so I'm testing it to see. Yeah, shaking it up, and also hoping to have more information come in so that things fall into place.
But when you're facilitating, it's very delicate.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're always very alert to how much we're going into the realm of words or not. And it's very delicate, and the key with using words is that's the real, it's when it really gets like boiled down to this like tincture, and then sometimes it's just one word. Bert Hellinger did a lot of like having a child like look at the parent and just say, please. That was a very common one that he used, just please. And that sort of you can feel it, right? It sort of establishes this sweet sort of need that's healthy to feel, which a lot of people haven't gotten to feel towards their parents.
And another one is yes.
Yes.
It's like
you see the massacre, or you see whatever happens.
You see your childhood and all of the ripples, the painful experiences. You see what happened back there, and you just say yes to it.
It's kind of like you often say, like, this happened.
Yes, this happened.
This happened is a similar phrase.
One thing that helped me a lot in constellation work is the relationship, for instance, a child to a parent. The child is I am a little one. Yeah. And that order has really helped me in my own family. Are there other that order shows up? I know that one, but I don't know.
Sometimes you get them to sit down.
Or be smaller.
You get to really actually, and sometimes like when I'm watching a constellation and I see someone start to sit near a parent or at the feet of a parent, I'm already seeing that it's resolved. Or when I'm either one-on-one or in constellation where the parent kind of moves behind the person. Then I'm seeing that I don't need to have that phrase.
It's already happening.
It's already happening. But when someone's like, you know, and they're talking down to their parent, they're feeling this towards the, you know, their parent is down there.
And the parent sometimes goes along with that. It's not always just,
you know,
right. Right. And another thing, Gayla, just to add to that, besides the way it can show up, besides the way the phrases can be, is there's also seeding it in as a possibility, which again is one of those intuitive things you have to sort of feel. Because if you try to do it too quickly, it may not go very deep. But there is a way in which you can say, why don't you try to make yourself smaller and say this, and just, it's very subtle. And just see if the person can feel into it. Yeah. So that's another way of doing it.
And then another one that I like is having ancestors behind parents or ancestors, grandparents, behind physical supporting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for
And it reintroduces it because we forget it. We get this feeling of being isolated and like, especially in the United States, because we're trained here to be islands and to be self-sufficient, in quotes. And so then to suddenly remember, like, oh my God, and let it sink in. It's such a balm for that.
what do you think the cultures, many of them that have altars in their homes for their ancestors?
Right.
They like the incense, so they give them some rice every day.
Exactly.
We just think those are dead people.
A great song. Those who have died, never having entered harbor packed with the living. They are the best in the air. They are the best in the trees. Just keep
Yeah.
going.
Wow.
In the ground.
They did have a pact with the living. I like that.
Well, we ought to play it on the
Yeah.
radio.
Fine.
Yeah.
Wow, that is, or you could just sing it.
I don't know all the words, but I can just think it.
Wow.
Bert Hellinger said that pact, like Bert Hellinger also said that, like, as, see if I can find this quote. He said, makes this really interesting point about how, like, as we evolve, it helps those who've gone before, and as they evolve, it helps us. And it's like a back.
Yeah.
Dance,
What's that?
like a dance.
No, well, it is like, well, I guess it is like a dance. Yeah, it is a little bit of a dance. And it's and we see it all the time. Like, we sit around and talk about what happened in the past, or we don't. Especially in this country, you know, the United States of amnesia, we call it, right? We've been taught for different reasons not to think about the past. Right? What's that?
I like your perspective, because like,
Yeah.
we forget.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, in this country in particular, we don't have much of a culture of remembering, but we kind of do unconsciously. It's the same thing in a family system.
Every year it's a new thing, 4th of July.
Right. Yeah. They're very distracting. So, but yeah, but making that conscious again and realizing that everybody's in us, like Charey said, whether physically or socially. Super.
I think I just want to also bring in that it's, you know, it was 15 years ago that we were trained. And then I did a dance about facilitating. I pulled back. I couldn't imagine what we're talking about right now. I could not imagine that I could ever do that. Like what we're sharing. I was like, how will I ever? Those are so many details. How will I ever hold that? And then I was almost pushed into hosting a practice group. And I was like, totally resistant. So we did that, but it was like, okay, this is a practice group, and it was a couple years. And then the practice group went away, and I was so relieved because there was, oh my gosh, this is such responsibility. It's so big, and I just don't have, it's like I could feel my mind, it's way beyond my mind, and I can't understand what I'm doing, and I could screw it up royally. So those kinds of things were in my head, but there was like, it's just like when we start a constellation and something starts to unfold, it takes time. Like if we had all the time in the world for somebody's constellation, maybe even just the conversation that you had in pairs with somebody. And
There's a lot there, right? That you still haven't.
just your grandmother or your friends, and all of a sudden all of this movement starts happening. And if you had all the time in the world, it would just keep going. So we take a snapshot in this room, and for a variety of reasons, we're only taking a piece of it. We're not trying to overwhelm, we're not trying to solve everything in somebody's life, so that it's actually digestible. And also, we're not trying to help them,
Mhm.
so that we're actually supporting their best growth. There, and doing it in a way that's really gonna work for them.
Mhm.
Also,
More that really,
Yeah,
not trying to help them, I think that's really important.
yeah, that is a key to entanglement. Every time I want to help, I entangle and I take on.
Mhm.
and I want to just tweak that a tiny bit and just say that it also kind of depends on what you mean by help. Some people use help as a kind of service
Yeah,
in a certain way that's healthy, but helping in the sense that moves towards rescue.
Rescue, yeah.
Or what they call the Jungian psychology, they call it the heroic attitude.
Mhm.
When you're heroing, that kind of help is what's meant when they say don't
Yeah.
the client. Doesn't mean don't serve.
Does it put you in a higher or better position than them?
For one thing.
Right.
That's one reason. That's one reason. And then also because it entangles.
and
You start to get into their system and you become like a parent.
Mhm.
Do you think you know what's good for it?
Where instead what you're doing is you're saying, this is what I observe. This is what it looks like. I'm gonna leave that. You know.
It's also kind of trusting the person, like I trust you. That you have
Yes.
what you need to take care of yourself. in this
Absolutely.
That's
situation.
okay. There's a whole class just on that. Like to trust, that's a very interesting because that's a whole systemic dynamic that can go on for generations, that can be there dynamics that can be undone just by that trust
Mhm.
that the other person has what they need. But that we have to at least someday, but it's a good one.
that's, you know, this is the thing is, all the best qualities of being in the field and getting the results of a constellation as a facilitator are continuing to work in my psyche. And I get to practice out with clients and I get to practice out in groups. And sure, sometimes I want to please or I want to wrap this up.
Right.
It's a little uncomfortable over here, and so I'd like to wrap it up. And whenever that happens, I get to learn something about myself.
Right.
So it's a very, you know, it's just like, it's continuing to bow to the field, just like continuing to bow to, yeah.
The destinies of the people that you're serving. Yeah. Something huge.
The training trains me. You know, when you, if and when you want to keep moving in the direction of facilitation, it will erode a whole way of thinking that is as Western civilization.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
Right. So, well, so I'll just add one last point and then we can just see how we want to use the rest of our time before we go. Just one really big rig zoomed out picture. There's a quote here, so from Hungary says the greater soul. So that's kind of like the divine, or it's kind of like the collective, okay? The power behind the movement of life. The greater soul moves in only one direction, and that is to bring into union that which has been made separate.
Mm.
So he's saying like this is the movement of the universe. And so when we're in a constellation, we're participating in that. So where there's a wound, something has been made separate that is slowly coming back together.
Can you read that quote?
Yes. The greater, this is the one that we were doing the interview, I couldn't remember it. The greater soul moves in only one direction. And that is to bring into union that which has been made separate. So everything is trying to find its union. So like when we're working with someone who's obviously wounded in a relationship with their father, we're watching this and it's like there's all crying and the father's turning away from the wounded child and all of that. it looks on the surface like a separation. But the whole, what we're doing while we're watching, and the whole group is holding the space, is actually the pain is coming from the desire for union, because that's where everything's moved. So finding a way to be able to be in union with destiny is the aim. That's the big picture of constellation work, beyond like the personal neurosis or drama or whatever, you know. So yeah.
I'm thinking you don't necessarily need a word in terms of like, thinking of like, relationships and relationships during,
Yeah.
But the union could be, the pair of work can happen internally. The union was kind of the greater soul, as you say,
Yeah.
like that doesn't, that the micro is the child and father relationship. The macro is the finding the union, harmony, again, within yourself and
Sort of.
okay.
Sort of. So first off, we never assume what's going to happen or what could happen.
Sure.
So I would have to be zooming out and looking at the future to do that. To say like, well, you know, you probably shouldn't, you know, be close to your father in reality. We never know where the process will take the person, but there are cases where a person can, what I would say is they come into a union with the reality of what the situation is. So if the father is very dangerous, for example, then what often happens is if I'm not resolved and I haven't found that union, then I do go back and get into trouble in real life. And when I do a constellation and I fully take in who he is, who abused him, how my grandparents survived that war and came out in so much trouble, then I sort of just take all that in and then I know what to do. It's hard to explain, it's a different perspective, but it goes without saying that we're not encouraging people here to go hang out with their, you know, their mother who's not conscious because she's on heroin all the time, or whatever the extreme situation is. But we don't actually know come of the process. Or tell somebody you should stay away from your phone. We don't know.
We definitely don't do that, and we don't send them in to have that conversation finally.
There's no particular outcome. It's really, you have to kind of experience it to see it. So it's like, there's no particular outcome. Like, well, then you need to go talk to your dad now that you feel better here about it. We don't know. They have the experience and it's like a seed, and then you see what works best.
Sounds crazy, but it'll make sense.
Well, it's almost like the charge is decreased, so like, I don't know, so what it sounds like what you're saying, so then it's almost like the person doesn't even necessarily need to have the conversation.
Yeah. That could also be an outcome.
I guess the other thing it made me think of is like, because you were saying that like, the union is not necessarily two people coming back together, but it almost feels like it's love.
Right.
And so it's like, for me, sometimes, like right now, especially in this window of time, taking space from my mom actually makes it so much easier for me to love her
Right.
at a distance. So it's like
Right.
loving detachment, and that might change, but it's like, at least I'm in that space of love, and then the constellation keeps going on.
Right.
I don't know, that's
Great. Yeah. Sometimes that's the outcome, that you enter into a kind of a different relationship with your roots, and that makes it clearer for you, like, I really need to give my mother and I space. It's just, each case is different. It's very hard to know, you know? And there may be times that people come in and they say, I'm just giving my mom space, and they're really suffering. And something else is needed, and they may discover that they need to go be around them. We just never know and never give a prescription of what you have to do, you know?
The other piece is giving them a good place. That's the phrase that I remember a lot. It's giving them a good place, because if if someone or something is in your space and it's just sort of very uncomfortable, you're not in right order with it. So putting yourself in, giving them a good space, giving them a good place,
In your
being
heart.
in right order.
Right. And if they're a dangerous person, you don't have to act that in person.
Movements that strengthen, and I don't know what the opposite phrase is.
Movements that weaken.
Weaken.
Yeah,
I always like that.
yeah. Do you wanna, or do you?
No, go ahead.
It's a very intuitive thing and you can kind of see it in the field. So it's something to look at. I mean, it's a big topic, so I can't go that far into it, but it's something to look at when you're making choices or you're interacting with people. If you seed it as a question, like, okay, I'm going, for example, I'm going onto social media and I'm getting sucked into an argument, you know, and you can feel the way it starts to weaken you psychologically. You thrash a little bit, you get frustrated, you start to obsess about what the person said, and I'm gonna say this, all of that is a weakening movement, although it might look aggressive. And a strengthening movement is like, for example, I look at what my father did, I take it in completely. And then like physically in the constellation, I may make a movement forward. And I feel sort of strengthened by having taken that in, you know.
And as a facilitator, either as a facilitator or someone in the field, there might be a strengthening. It might have gotten to this nice resolved place, in this uplifted or strengthened place. And then I personally have taken them off track, and or they take themselves off track. And suddenly they're talking about it's like not holding that space. And so it's like, whoa, wait.
Something got weakened.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you could feel like, "Ugh."
Yeah.
It's, and so sometimes, we'll just stop it. We'll just stop the constellation, 2 steps back was the strong point. We hope that they remember that in their system, because we just sort of went down a particular road again. But that's part of the learning, in my opinion, because I watch myself weaken. Adding something that's not necessary.
Yeah. It's something you experiment with all the time, Kayla. That's what I've found. And I do it all the time during the day, even. I just check. Is this weakening or strengthening? Yeah, what I'm doing. Yeah. Super useful. Yeah.
It's a great practice.
Practice. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. You can just check in, like anyone you're familiar with how your life force is moving. Most of us are. We know when something is kind of dragging us down. But instead of thinking like, does this make me happy or sad? Does this make me excited or dull? Or does this depress me? Or, instead you just feel, is this strengthening me? Or is this depleting me? And then it's such a great guidepost to use.
I'm aware that we're probably at that point where we should
Start
ending.
Yeah.
Or we're gonna weaken.
Right.
Some of us are like, "Wow." And I'd love for us to kind of step out in the kind of in the best note, in the best place.
Yeah.
The strengthened place. But is there any last things that we want to
Yeah.
do,
Or
or
practical questions or anything, so just everybody knows tomorrow is focused on actually doing the constellations. Sunday is focused on sort of deconstructing and working with them for people that are thinking about training.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
I sit in that chair. I'm the one that talks about 6 I know.
It's you we were talking about. It's not- Right.
oh,
How can I?
What can I do?
What you're talking about, I feel in my body.
like a
To get closer to something that's
I'll be like, what can I do?
Ask myself.
So you go, and I've heard the whole thing, and I followed it, and then I followed over here, and I kind of, and I also like, okay, I'm listening to that, and that one's kind of quieting, that's not drawing my attention, so I'm observing it, and then I'll bring it back to what can I do for
What do you
you?
need?
What do you need?
Yeah.
I'll just bring it right back, what do you need?
What's your outcome?
Well, it's like, what's your, it's returns the person back to, so what are we doing this for?
Like back to you also, because
Right.
when you're thinking that all.
And I just want to say, to be fair to like that instinct to be chatty, because the only reason we're bringing it up is because it's important for facilitators to think about, but to be fair to it, there are times where people just are tense and there's a catharsis.
Yeah.
And so it's not to like be too tough on it. It's just because this type of work is so different, it's important to keep it.
I was telling you, I'm here, I know I'm supposed to
Right.
come forward with something, but it's hard for me to really
Clarify.
get in on that. So what would you say to like the client before I'm in the chair?
Okay, before you're
Like,
in
how
the
can I,
How can you clarify your
Yes.
question, basically?
yes, before I put you through that.
Yeah.
You know, the first thing that comes to me is still the somatic thing. When you think about this, does a lot move in your body? Because you've tried to use your mind to determine it, that hasn't worked. So what's the other thing we can do is the next step we can do is see what, does the chest tighten or expand? Does that practice of like, does this have energy? Does it have chi movement in it? You know?
And when I'm listening, I mean, yes,
Yeah.
so that's, when I'm listening, and just like you can listen for yourself, is what is the thing that has the largest, even if it's a, what's the,
Right.
like, it's
feels
the
urgent?
that I need to work on.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is when we start doing constellations, and I, as a facilitator, I have to reel myself back and only give them what they asked for. Like, I might go, well, there's all this other stuff over here, and I know that could improve your money situation, but then
That's probably
it's
for
like,
the next time.
yes. Or I could start to feel, oh, and it's like, oh, but they only asked for this, they want to have understanding. So then we just give them understanding, we end it.
I can give you one example. I had a couple of people come in the Spanish group who were very broad. So some people do this, right? You remember this. So instead of people being confused or getting too many things, they're being very broad. And so all I do is I keep narrowing. This person says, I need to relax more. So I go like, oh, so what do you do for a living? Okay, so do you need to relax, like get a job that's more, and I keep making it more and more narrowing. Well, what kind of job would that be? What kind would that be? What would that be? And like the case that we saw that day, this woman was very broadly talking about expressing herself. And by the time we got it all the way down to her writing, it was like this. It's like, I still haven't written what I needed. And so it's like helping the client know.
Yeah, and that yearning, it's
That
the
yearning.
strongest
Yes,
yearning.
what's the strongest yearning? What feels the most urgent? What feels the most powerful?
That's good.
Yeah.
This is a good way to end with that
So
question.
you can all think about that for bringing something for tomorrow that you want to constellate. See what feels strong in your body. Because I think tomorrow will only be a few people that are not planning, that are not interested in facilitating. So there'll be a lot of space.
Yeah, we're gonna, most of the people that are interested in facilitating and learning this whole weekend are gonna get to do their own pieces of work.
Especially because we have 2 days. A day and a half.
Yeah, so if you didn't get a piece on Saturday, we'll be able to do a piece on Sunday for you.
There should be space if you want to do the whole weekend to have your constellation. Surely. With that amount.
Yeah, well,
Anything else?
Yes.
Yeah, practical questions.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Oh, yeah, it's a potluck tomorrow. People can go, they don't have to stay, they don't have to bring anything, or, you know, even, you can eat even if you don't bring anything, so I'm sure there's gonna be food. And indoor beverages and all of that. We should have plenty of food, for sure. I might actually have to move things around, so we have a bigger buffet table, for sure.
So people we're asking everybody to bring something. If you can, I'll bring something.
We all bring indoor.
And if there's something there you like, or it's not, whatever, you know. You have other options. Yeah.
After, like, once we wrap up, if people wanna talk about, like, what's everyone bringing, or something, just to make sure.
Anybody has special requirements, or, yeah. Usually works. For that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, all right.
Could you read that one more?
One more time, okay.
That'd be beautiful.
It is beautiful, yeah. The greater soul moves in only one direction. That is to bring into union that which has been made separate. So that's what any constellation is participating in. Yeah. Participating. Yeah.
Ready for being here and all that stuff. If you have any questions about the weekend, let us know.
Just feel-